And while Ukraine is defending itself with all its might, last night there were explosions and fires in several regions of Russia, as well as in the temporarily occupied Crimea. For the fifth time this spring, the city of Tuapse in the Krasnodar region was under attack, among others. Locals are posting videos of explosions and smoke over the city on Telegram channels. At least one strike hit the area near the oil refinery. However, it is unknown whether the facility itself was damaged. Meanwhile, reports of a missile attack are coming from Taganrog. The local city authorities there have also confirmed it. The Russian Telegram channel Astra claims that an aircraft repair plant was targeted. A fire broke out on its premises.
It hit directly. Where exactly was that place located? It was the old house we saw. A rich, intense, and solid black color.
A column of smoke also rose over Voronezh. According to OSINT analysis, Astra is burning in the area of the military airfield Baltimore. Russia regularly uses it to launch strikes against Ukraine. The local governor stated that air defense destroyed 2 high-speed targets. Meanwhile, in occupied Crimea, in Sevastopol, the street where the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet's Air Force was attacked at dawn is still blocked off. There are many military personnel near the site of the strike. This was reported by the Telegram channel Crimean Wind. According to the public channel, the headquarters itself was almost completely burned out. Ambulances have been coming and going there since early morning. Large black bags were being loaded into a Ural truck in the courtyard. According to preliminary information, the headquarters was hit by Storm Shadow missiles. The Ukrainian military has not yet commented on the attack. In recent months, Ukraine has quadrupled the destruction of enemy logistics, equipment, and command posts. This was reported by Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. To intensify this pressure, the Ministry of Defense is launching the Logistics Lockdown Program. Its goal is to scale up the use of medium-range drones and strike even deeper into the enemy's rear. Within the framework of the program, the Ministry of Defense has already allocated an additional 5 billion hryvnias. The most effective brigades and units have received the funds. They will be able to purchase drones independently. At the same time, centralized purchases are being prepared through tenders. According to Fedorov's forecast, tangible results will be seen as early as this summer. The enemy, even at a great distance from the front line, will no longer feel safe. Strikes by medium-range drones on the enemy's rear and logistics reduce the number of assaults on the front line and increase the occupiers' losses. If in October the Russians lost 67 soldiers per 1 square kilometer of advance, by April that number had risen to 179. Ukrainian strikes are increasingly inflicting damage on Russia's fuel industry. According to Bloomberg, the Kremlin is considering restricting the export of diesel and aviation fuel produced at refineries after the attacks on Russian energy facilities. Russian companies have already been advised to reduce the export of petroleum products abroad, and the decision on a possible ban on the export of diesel and aviation fuel is in the final stage of approval, Bloomberg emphasizes. This move could also affect global markets as Moscow exports about 40% of its diesel. In recent months, Ukraine has significantly intensified strikes on Russian oil refineries and the energy sector. In April, the average level of oil refining in Russia dropped to just over 4.5 million barrels per day. This is the lowest figure in more than 16 years. Russia continues psychological pressure and threats of new massive strikes on Kyiv, trying to sow panic and influence not only Ukraine but also its Western partners. Moscow declares its intention to systematically carry out strikes on enterprises of the Ukrainian defense industrial complex, on decision-making centers and command posts, as well as issuing warnings to foreigners, diplomats, and employees of international organizations to leave the capital as soon as possible. In this scenario, the attempt at intimidation appears to have failed. Embassies and diplomats remain in Kyiv, not only European ones, but also those of the US and China. Veronika Boyko reports on the new wave of Kremlin blackmail and the world's reaction.
For the third day in a row, the Kremlin continues to escalate the atmosphere around new strikes on Kyiv. However, they are already getting confused in their own threats. Kremlin spokesperson Peskov stated the day before that strikes on the Ukrainian capital could become systematic, although no specific timeline was mentioned. The main thing, they say, is that everyone hears Russia's warning while Moscow is not concerned about the world's reaction. Meanwhile, some Russian officials have already started to soften their rhetoric and back away from previous statements. They claim that there will be no strikes on the city center and that the president's office and the Verkhovna Rada are the real decision-making centers. It seems that in Moscow it's clear their hysteria hasn't worked. Despite the threats, foreign diplomats and embassies remain in the Ukrainian capital.
This is yet another act of intimidation from Moscow. We are used to this, but we will not accept it. This new act of intimidation is even more outrageous because Russia, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, is supposed to guarantee the protection of Ukrainian civilians as well as foreign embassies.
European countries, one after another, responded with diplomatic démarches against Moscow itself, declaring that all of them will continue working in Kyiv. The ministries of foreign affairs of Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, France, Lithuania and Latvia summoned the Russian ambassadors. The European Union's representation continues to operate in the Ukrainian capital. The EU ambassador to Ukraine, Katarina Maternova, publicly mocked the Kremlin's threats and called them a sign of Moscow's growing desperation.
The regime that for years has been bombing residential buildings, museums, maternity hospitals, schools and power plants has suddenly started speaking the language of international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions. The very same regime that launches missiles and drones at civilians every night is now warning others to stay away. We understand perfectly well what this means.
Moscow deliberately directed these signals specifically at foreign diplomats. The Russians tried to sow panic, fear, and to bring back the sense of the first days of the Great War.
They wanted to repeat what happened in February 2022, when the mere threat of war, of a Russian invasion, led to almost all diplomatic missions leaving Kyiv at that time. It was precisely the effect of a psychological attack that was important to the Russians. And it didn't work.
One of the main goals of the Kremlin is to undermine Western support for Ukraine.
This is also an element of intimidating the West as a whole. And by proceeding in this particular manner, they are sincerely hoping that the West will eventually take the necessary steps, such as pressure on Kyiv or reducing support, and in this way Putin will be able to achieve his goals.
The contact between Moscow and the United States was especially telling. A single statement from the Kremlin's foreign ministry was not enough, so Minister Lavrov called U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio to personally deliver the threats. But the American Secretary of State did not attach much importance to them.
They sent a message to all embassies. I think he just wanted to personally tell me that they had warned the diplomatic missions about the danger. But this has been a dangerous place for years now. In every war, there is a constant threat of escalation.
The Kremlin is becoming increasingly nervous about the growing pessimism in Washington regarding the prospects for peace talks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated directly that no new meetings between the parties are planned for now, and the United States does not intend to participate in endless negotiations without results. Putin has backed himself into a diplomatic dead end.
The Russian government in Moscow has finally and completely cast aside its diplomatic mask, at the very least when it comes to its official diplomatic communications with the American people and their leaders. And this is precisely a very strong indication, a powerful signal that Russia does not know what to do. It's like a terrorist who has been cornered and is ready to blow himself up along with those around him just to avoid being captured by, let's say, law enforcement. So
in Moscow, they are trying to push Washington to put pressure on Ukraine again and to resume negotiations on the Kremlin's terms.
Pressure on Ukraine needs to be restored. We need to return to the so-called Concorage. These supposed agreements, which have never been officially confirmed anywhere, but allegedly existed between the Russians and the Americans, stated that the basis for a peaceful settlement in Ukraine should be the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Donbas.
Meanwhile, a response was voiced at the UN level. Almost 50 countries expressed concern over the new wave of Russian escalation. At the same time, the United States did not support this document. Instead, China spoke out. In its characteristic Beijing style, it called on all parties to refrain from escalating hostilities. But it is also in no hurry to evacuate its diplomats. At the Institute for the Study of War, they believe the Kremlin is trying to recover from the humiliation following the failure of the so-called truce on May 9th, unsuccessful battles, and disappointment among Russians.
At the front, there are no successes. The strikes on Kyiv do not look like a terrible act of revenge. And so they needed to demonstrate strength, to show their muscles. They want to break this stalemate in the war by intensifying air attacks, including strikes on Kyiv.
However, Russia's capabilities are not unlimited. They
cannot use 500 or more drones every day. in the same way they cannot launch dozens of missiles every day. Because as research on the equipment used to attack us shows, some missiles and some drones are coming straight off the assembly line.
Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasizes that the overall threat level to the capital has not changed. Kyiv thanked the diplomatic missions that remain in the capital and called on partners to increase pressure on the Kremlin and support Ukrainian air defense. Veronica Boyko, Fakti, ICTV, Marathon, United News.